Hello, Command229 here, another Topic of the Week video. This week I'm going to be talking about the downfall of the MCU, or at least where it started. This week's topic was submitted by the Wise Wolf on the Discord, and his topic is, where do you think the MCU went wrong? Was it only recently, or did it start in Phase 2 or 3? So, if you ask me, I think the MCU started to go wrong immediately after the first Avengers movie. Now, Phase 1 as a whole wasn't ultra cohesive. A lot of these movies were very separated, they only had sort of small links, and it was usually like Coulson showing up in several of the movies, or S.H.I.E.L.D. being referenced, and stuff like that. But after Avengers, everyone started to come together, so you would think that this would start a trend of these movies like being more interconnected. And then Phase 2 is just like, let's decide to just crap the bed immediately and then panic. So, after Avengers, the first movie we got was Iron Man 3. It was a great way to kick off Phase 2 and show us that Marvel just didn't care. Iron Man 3 was an absolute disaster. I mean, not only was the story bad, and a lot of people know about the Mandarin twist now, where, hey, the Mandarin, a major villain from the comics, was hyped up, they got Ben Kingsley to play him, and everyone's like, oh my gosh, and then it turns out it wasn't really him, it was just some dude, and Mandarin didn't really exist. And it's funny, is that, it's like, Marvel were like, oh crap, people didn't like that. So now in Shang-Chi, we're bringing in, we're going to talk about the real Mandarin. Then why didn't you just have the real Mandarin to begin with? And it's years later. It goes back to 2013. And 8 years later, now you're like, hey, let's fix that. It was very poor thought. And it was very much just there for ooh, it's a twist, what a twist. Stuff like that is really stupid. If you don't need a twist, don't put it in. The Mandarin twist was terrible. And, to make matters even worse, Iron Man 3 completely assassinated Tony's character. The idea that he developed, PTSD-induced anxiety after nearly dying in Avengers is interesting. That's not really developed. It's brought up, it's part of the beginning part of, hey, wow, Tony, you've developed anxiety. Oh, wow, that's actually totally crazy. Like, Tony Stark is, the epitome of self-confidence. And now he's having, anxiety attacks. This is really interesting. It doesn't really get developed. Goodness gracious. So you would think, well, maybe the actual story will be good. No. The story is... Iron Man 3 is just a really bad movie, and by the end of it, Tony destroys all of his Iron Man stuff for reasons. His house from the first movie completely destroyed because he was an idiot, and he decided to just give his home address out, and then he took no precautions whatsoever? My gosh, he's such an idiot. And at the end of the movie, he just gets his arc reactor taken out. Well, gee, if he could have just done that the entire time, then why didn't he? Then that also makes his talk with Bruce in Avengers completely stupid now, because he was talking to Bruce about how, this arc reactor is part of me, and, it keeps me alive. Oh, but he just got surgery and had it taken out because of reasons. Don't know what the hell Shane Black was thinking. But, I mean, considering this is the same guy who made the newer Predator movie. But, it was stupid. It was terrible. And it was a complete insult to Tony Stark's character. And it was just a not entertaining movie. Great start to Phase 2. Assassinating one of the greatest characters in the MCU. And you can tell, that was an immediately regret. And I can almost feel Joss Whedon's frustration with that when it comes to Age of Ultron. Because all that stuff is just, ignored, and he's back to making Iron Man stuff and being Iron Man again, and it's just that was a better decision. Age of Ultron is not good, but after that you get Thor: The Dark World, which is not as bad as Iron Man 3. That's not really saying much. That's like when people go, well, at least Solo isn't the last Jedi. That's not really a compliment. No. But Thor the Dark World is kind of boring. Malekith. And it's funny because relatively recently, I looked at Malekith in the comics, and he's a lot more entertaining in the comics, especially like involving with the Dark Council and stuff, and it's like, wow, we just got like a bland nothing villain who's just super generic bad guy, and we could have had something far more entertaining than this at the Dark Elves. Yeah, Phase 2 wasn't great. And then Thor the Dark World, the worst part about it, though, I mean, it has some good parts to it, don't get me wrong. I do like some of the interactions between Thor and Loki. And I do like that they showed that Loki did care about his mother. But overall, it's not a good movie. And it ends one of the most infuriating ways. I remember when I was in the theater, I was so pissed off. And Thor gives up being on the throne, and then he goes to Earth to be with Jane. I'm like, what the hell? What happened to all of his character development from the first movie? Like, at the end of the first movie, he was willing to give up being with Jane if it meant saving Jotunheim. That was the whole thing. And as Loki tries to point out, he's like, you'll never see her again. Well, I mean, he does see her again, but he very likely couldn't have seen her again. There was no guarantee that they could have fixed the Bifrost after he, smashed it. But he was willing to make that sacrifice because of his character development, who had taught him from being selfish, arrogant, and egotistical to being selfless and understanding sacrifices had to be made as the king of Asgard. And he just walks away to go be with Jane. Yay! It's not good. Then you get to Winter Soldier. One of the worst movies in the MCU. Now, I hated The Winter Soldier from the get-go. I saw it in theaters. I was hyped for The Winter Soldier. I already knew it was Bucky. I knew that from the comics. So I went in, and then goodness gracious, that movie was complete piss. Constant retcons all over the place. Shocking twists that do nothing but damage the story. The Hydra twist, singularly the dumbest idea in the entire movie. Yeah, let's destroy S.H.I.E.L.D. Let's just say S.H.I.E.L.D. has been evil the whole time. You what, mate? You did what? Hey, characters that we saw before, like Sitwell. I really liked Sitwell. I watched Item 47, and I actually really enjoyed Sitwell in that. And now all of a sudden they're like, oh, Sitwell was Hydra. He was totally evil. Freaking what? And it doesn't even make sense. Because if you look at what happened, like what Tony did in Avengers. He made sure to hack into S.H.I.E.L.D. to get all of their dirty secrets, and that's how they discovered the Phase 2 weaponry. And then, supposedly, he just never found out about anything with Hydra, ever. And there's so many issues with this. But it's it's a very sloppily made movie, and the story is piss, and the Russo brothers are complete hacks. And I was saying that coming out of the theater, and then everyone attacked me. I got harassed for that by MCU fans because, no, Winter Soldier's the greatest movie of all time. And then, of course, apparently it was so well received that Marvel decided to just put the Russo brothers in charge. It's only recently, in recent years, that other people have been looking back at Winter Soldier and going, yeah, that wasn't all that great. Yeah, I've been saying this since I saw it in theaters. Then after this, you have Guardians of the Galaxy, which is, there are plenty more issues with Winter Soldier, but I could fill hours of time talking about the problems with that. I'm just going over brief, major issues. But, after that you have Guardians of the Galaxy, which is the best movie in Phase 2. It's the only one that I find even remotely entertaining. I do have a few issues with it, particularly tonal issues, because it truly tries to be really, goofy and funny, and then it'll be, really dark all of a sudden, and it's like, oh. It's kind of uncomfortable. It's nowhere near as bad as Guardians of the Galaxy 2. That movie is a tonal catastrophe. But at least Guardians of the Galaxy is entertaining. It doesn't feel like I'm insulted watching it like I do all the other MCU movies, or the Phase 2 movies, specifically. And then after that, you have Age of Ultron, which I only started like I'd never been able to finish it because it was always so bored. But you know, looking like going out and starting to watch it recently, it's like from the beginning you can see like there's this weird dichotomy of this is Joss Whedonisms, like this is the fun stuff, the you know the story building and stuff, and then you have like this weird stuff that almost feels like the story that just doesn't feel like Joss Whedon. It's like, oh, here's the corporate stuff of what has to be done, and then here's what Joss Whedon is doing. Then you have this uncomfortable mess of stuff where it mixes between really entertaining stuff and just really dumb stuff. Like, we need to push the plot, or we need to push stupid stuff like Black Widow and Bruce Banner having a relationship. What? It was dumb. So, with most of the Phase 2 movies being bad, you may be thinking, wow, that's a pretty bad start. Like, Phase 1, ironically enough, Phase 1 was made in a time when they didn't have any deep plans for a cinematic universe. They kind of toyed with the idea. The end of Iron Man 1, when they had Nick Fury show up, that was sort of a neat idea. And the end of Incredible Hulk, when Tony Stark shows up to talk to General Ross, it was like, oh, wow, this is disconnected to the other movie, because a lot of these superhero movies just didn't really do that. And then it's like, oh, then each one of them are connected, and it's like you have Thor and you have Coulson showing up, and then you have Iron Man 2, and they've introduced Black Widow, and they talk more about Shield, and then you have Captain America, the first Avenger, and then that ends with him meeting Nick Fury, and it's like, oh wow, and then it all leads to Avengers. And while it wasn't planned very methodically, it worked out. And then in Phase 2, you would think, okay, well, now that they know what they're doing, now that they have several movies of experience of making these movies, you would think, all right, now things will get better. But then it got worse. It's like they just charged forward with no plan. It's like, I remember back in the day, after Avengers, like Joss Whedon was being put in charge of, like, overseeing stuff in the MCU to make sure it worked because he did such a good job with Avengers, and that was such a huge success. I mean, he even had a show, The Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., which is like, which is kind of meh for a lot of times, but, the Sith, that Sith episode when she showed up early on, that was good. I liked that. But then, all of a sudden, Joss Whedon is, like, kicked off of that, and all of a sudden, he's not involved in the show after the first part. And then Winter Soldier happens, which, now reminder, Winter Soldier says that S.H.I.E.L.D. was Hydra the whole time and destroys S.H.I.E.L.D. So you have a show called Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. that just barely started, and S.H.I.E.L.D. is gone. That doesn't seem all that well planned. These aren't called Agents of the MCU. It's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and then S.H.I.E.L.D. is gone almost immediately. It's like, oh, well, we wanted this big, crazy plot twist in Winter Soldier, and we didn't think about how it would affect the MCU. And to be honest, it was one of the most damaging ideas in the MCU, because S.H.I.E.L.D. was one of the biggest connecting factors between all these movies. Not every single one of them. The stuff in, like, Guardians of the Galaxy, it wasn't the most, it's in space. It's not connected to stuff on Earth, directly at least. So you would think, yeah, you would probably want to be very careful with how you handle, S.H.I.E.L.D. And it's like, we just destroyed S.H.I.E.L.D. Also, S.H.I.E.L.D. was evil the whole time. So in Iron Man 1, S.H.I.E.L.D. was evil. In Iron Man 2, S.H.I.E.L.D. was evil. And in Avengers, S.H.I.E.L.D. was evil. But if S.H.I.E.L.D. was evil, if S.H.I.E.L.D. was Hydra the whole time, why would you have all that wackety doodah about Loki having to gather enemies of S.H.I.E.L.D.? Because it wasn't thought out. And that's the thing that really gets to me. Is that they just very clearly didn't think this out. And they would just let some people do whatever they want. And a lot of stuff gets worse later on. And I haven't watched every single MCU movie. And it's not like, not all of them are bad. I mean, I watched Doctor Strange and that was okay. It wasn't amazing. But shoot, it wasn't terrible. And I'm like, I guess I would have liked this more if it was in like early on in the story. But it's like when it takes place later on, it's like in a mess of movies like Black Panther, Thor Ragnarok, Civil War. Civil War is a dumpster fire. And I could talk about that for a while because that movie is a mess. But, to talk about where things started, it was phase 2, like right off the bat. Iron Man 3, piss. Thor the Dark World, slightly less piss, but still piss. The Winter Soldier, ultra mega piss. Guardians of the Galaxy, mostly fine. And Age of Ultron. What? Come on, guys. Like, you can hire the best writers. You can hire the best, directors. You can hire the best people to do these jobs, and it seems like they just stopped caring. It's almost like they realized, hey, people will go watch these movies no matter what. We don't need to try. And then they just decided to put out whatever. It's so similar to their approach with the sequel trilogy, and just a lot of the new movies. Like, the only reason that Rogue One was good was because they happened to have a decent script, and then they happened to have a director who really cared about Star Wars. It was a total accident that movie turned out to not suck. The sequel movies all suck because they didn't have any plan of what they were doing. They just started doing whatever. And with Solo, the Solo was piss. Anyone who tells you that Solo is better than the sequels is wrong. It's still as bad as those movies. It is awful. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it so much. But, with the MCU, it's like such a lack of care put into how those movies were made. And it's like, how did they do better when they didn't have a plan and they were still, like, experimenting versus once they have several years of experience making these types of movies? And it's just insane. It's like, and they couldn't keep anything, like, straight in terms of their lore and continuity. If you watch all of the MCU movies back to back, you start to see a lot of huge discrepancies in how a lot of characters act. And I'm not talking about discrepancies within the movies, I'm talking about between the movies, where you have something that happens and then it doesn't make sense for anything later. Iron Man 3 is a good example. Tony Stark blows up all his Iron Man stuff, he takes out his arc reactor, he gets rid of it, he's done being Iron Man, and then he's back at Age of Ultron. It was a good decision to bring him back, because why would you not? That was stupid in Iron Man 3, but it's still inconsistent, and it shows that they have no plan. And it's like, continually after that, they just don't really seem to have much of a plan about how these movies interact. I mean, shoot, take later movies, Civil War and Black Panther. Well, in Civil War, T'Challa already has the Black Panther powers in the suit. His dad dies, and now he becomes king. Except that in Black Panther, which is made after Civil War, then they're like, oh, well, you get the powers when you become king. But wait, then how did T'Challa have these powers before he became king? Because that only happened after his father was killed. Because they didn't care. Because whoever was writing that movie didn't pay attention to anything that was going on with T'Challa in Civil War. There's inconsistencies abound. A lot of people talk about Captain Marvel. Yeah, there's a lot of stupid stuff in Captain Marvel. Apparently Nick Fury met aliens and stuff in the 90s, and then in Avengers he was like, the first encounter we had with aliens was with Thor. Oops. And a lot of people will think that, I've actually seen people claim that Captain Marvel was the first time the MCU ever had like a retcon or contradiction. I'm just like, what? Phase 2, baby. Phase 2 is where all of this madness starts. A lot of the stupid stuff that people see later on started in Phase 2. And then weirdly with Phase 2, it's like a lot of these characters don't interact with each other in their individual movies, which, yes, of course, they're focused on those specific characters. But, like, we know that after Avengers, Bruce is hanging out with Tony. So where is Bruce during the entirety of Iron Man 3? He's just not there. Except that he shows up at the very end listening to Tony's story. Where the hell was he? I'm sure the Hulk would have been really helpful at any point. And frankly, with the Hulk, not getting his own movie, which really should have gotten a sequel. They were already setting up sequels in the first Hulk movie. Which is, by the way, holds up a lot better than I thought it did. And then it's like, oh no, we're just going to completely ignore him. Well, and then you have other characters. Like, in Winter Soldier, why didn't any of the other Avengers get contacted? Tony, for where the hell was Hawkeye in that movie? You know, Bruce, Thor isn't. Thor is actually back on Earth. I almost forgot. Thor is back on Earth by the time of the Winter Soldier. So why didn't these other Avengers get called in when Steve needs help? Oh, well, because it's a Captain America movie, and we only want to make vague references, because that's what a lot of these movies did before, and that's what they had always done. A lot of them would make these sort of vague references to other heroes, or other cities, or references to the comics, but they would never follow through with them, because it was just it was a cute little reference and nothing more. But in the MCU, it's like, no, you've established a connected cinematic universe. Why not utilize that? And then they barely use that until, oh, well, we have an Avengers movie, so now everyone's working together. One of the few examples of them doing that outside of Avengers is Civil War, which only serves to assassinate and destroy pretty much every character, and oof. Oh boy. But yeah, ultimately, everything started with Phase 2. All of the problems, a lot of the issues that people spotted later on in later movies like Black Panther and Captain Marvel, a lot of that stuff happened in Phase 2, and that's where all of it really originates. And unfortunately, a lot of people really didn't notice it at the time. I mean, a lot of people may look back now and start seeing it. Winter Soldier is finally starting to get criticized instead of being held up as one of the greatest movies of all time. But, yeah, if you want to know where the problems with the MCU started, it was Phase 2. And they never really tried to fix anything. So I actually think that that's good for today. If you want to submit a topic to me, you can either comment below if you're on YouTube, or if you're on Tumblr, send me an ask, put topic : and then whatever topic you want me to talk about. Or if you're on the Discord, you can go to the topic submissions channel and submit a topic to me there. Just make sure to follow the rules that I'll be posting down below. If you want to watch last week's topic video, you can check that out here. If you want to watch next week's topic video, you can check that out here when I get that done. So what are your thoughts on the MCU, and do you think it had a downfall? And if so, do you agree with what I said about it? Please comment below, and thank you for watching.